Hello, everyone. So I decided after reorganizing all my books that I wanted to talk about them. And you'll have to pardon me for any throat clearings or any coughing episodes. I'll try to keep them to a minimum. But as always, you can be rest assured I will not edit this video. So I'm just going to go through my bookshelves. We'll see how far I get with this first video because I'm hoping I can cover two, and these range from, as you see here, the oldest literature we have, and at most we will get to a little after Shakespeare's time, roughly the time of John Milton. And I know I did one of these not too long ago, maybe a year and a half, I think maybe 2 years ago. I can't remember exactly. But I have kind of a new way of thinking about my bookshelves, which isn't that, it's not groundbreaking in the slightest, but it's helped me mentally organize my knowledge much better, just with a couple small changes. So anyway, feel free to not watch this as always. And yeah, I think when I was thinking, okay, well, why am I going to make this? What's the point? I already did one recently. Well, partially, I just reorganized my books, and it's kind of cool to see them all reorganized. But in the end, I think I'm doing this, and I made this channel in general because I imagine there might be someone out there who is interested in the same things I'm interested in, but is not as far along on the path as I am. So maybe I can give some interesting ideas or interesting books that might take a while to find. So yeah, I think I'll do my normal pattern of having minimal structure to this. I'll just talk about a book if it strikes me, and if it doesn't strike me, you'll just see it in the video. And yeah, feel free to ask questions in the comments if you have any questions about anything, or if I skipped over something that you want to know more about. But yeah. So one of my main goals the last few years has been to broaden my repertoire, you could say, or my interests beyond just the kind of obvious Western historical tradition, starting in, Greeks and Romans, and then going up to the present with mostly a focus on Europe, which I would say even in the year 2024 is totally rampant, even from people who advocate against it. They can't help themselves from only knowing that. So I will say that's just been one of my interests for a long time, but I've been a little bit more methodical about it the last few years, and so you'll see some of that. That's also one of the reasons I wanted to redo my bookshelves, because I had things separated. I had a Chinese shelf, which I also had my Japanese stuff and some Arabic stuff on there, and so on and so on. And I had it kind of separated, mainly because I had gotten stuff more recently. But I wanted to combine everything as it actually was in the world at the time. So that'll be that, and we'll go ahead and get into it. Sorry if the video is shaky. I am holding the camera, so. All right, anyway, you see there, we start with Egypt. Now, I do want to start long-term with the Paleolithic, prehistory, but as of now, I have very minimal materials on that. So I just thought I would start with writing. So I have a couple books, historical works on early Egypt, and then my buddy, he goes by Cyrus in the Discord, also Drunzo on YouTube. He hooked me up with some ancient Egyptian literature here. Then we get to the Sumerians, which you could switch either one, but I just put ancient Egypt first. So Sumerians, and as you'll notice too, I've mixed in history and philosophy, history, mythology, that kind of thing with literature. So, and that's something I normally didn't do. I had a different history shelf, which in the end I felt didn't make any sense. So we have Epic of Gilgamesh here. This is my favorite translation of it, the George translation. We see above the 3-volume Rig Veda. I have Tso Chuan, which is the earliest history in Chinese culture. That's an abridged edition. I would like to get the full edition, but as with anything interesting, poor people aren't supposed to have it. So, all right, early China, which is a work on, prehistory China. And then we have the I Ching, which is the oldest written work in Chinese civilization. It's a divination text. And this is my favorite translation. Some of them, they can get really hokey, but I think John Minford balances it well with being an actually useful book, balancing that with being scholarly and having, commentaries to it and that sort of thing. So if you're interested in the I Ching but have been kind of skeptical like I was for a while, John Minford is the way to go. Book on the Minoans, their life. And I have that just before I have my Iliad, because the Minoans were in that earlier period before the so-called Greek Dark Age that preceded when the Iliad was written. I don't have that edition of the Odyssey, which I've been looking for a nice cheap edition for a while, but I do have Chapman's Homer, both the Iliad and the Odyssey, so that is my comprehensive bit there. Hesiod, the Book of Songs, the oldest work of Chinese poetry. The early Upanishads, which goes very nicely with my 3-volume Rig Veda. This is something I found recently that I was thrilled with at the local used bookstore. Text of early Greek philosophy, which has all the pre-Socratics, basically. Very pleased with that. I was looking for a nice authoritative edition so I could dip in and out of it, and that is perfect. Guy Davenport, that's my favorite translation of the early Greeks. He has 7 Greeks. It ranges from Archilochus, Heraclitus, Diogenes is in there, and his translations are just excellent. I have some little additions here. Herodotus, Thucydides. Thucydides was fascinating. Read that a couple years ago. And then some more stuff related to Hinduism. Mahabharata, and then the Bhagavad Gita is an extract from the Mahabharata. All right, and you'll notice all of this is in chronological order. Some of it is rough chronological order because some of these things don't have exact dates. And also, when possible, I tried to keep relevant things together, like Bhagavad Gita with the Mahabharata. Herodotus is next to Thucydides, and so on. So even though things might be slightly out of order, there's always some kind of logic behind them. All right, and then we get to the 4 Chinese classics. That is Confucius. Then we have the Tao Te Ching, which also John Minford, that edition right next to the 4 Chinese classics, John Minford also does that one, which is my favorite edition of the Tao Te Ching, which I would recommend. And then also Mencius, and what else is in there? What are these 4 classics? Well, yeah, Book of Cheng Tzu, of course, which I have a different edition of a little bit down the way, but another Taoist classic. Literally on the same day, at the same bookstore, I found this early Greek philosophy 2-volume. I found both the complete works of Plato and this 2-volume set of the complete works of Aristotle. Very reasonably priced. Same with the early Greek philosophy. So, yeah, of course, these are more reference texts. Plato and Aristotle come up all the time. So I'm very pleased to have, basically library reference level editions of all other stuff, so I can see the original, well, not the original Greek, but the original, from the goat's mouth, or what is that phrase anyway? It's okay. But yeah, Plato, Aristotle, right next to the Ramayana, which is the other great Hindu epic, along with the Mahabharata. This one is published by Princeton. They just had a half off sale, and I hooked myself up with this 1,000-page edition of the complete Ramayana. Next, we have, that's also the same as Cheng Su, Zhuangji, and this has a commentary alongside it, so that's why I put it a little later. Although I think that's about the right time too, right next to Plato, Aristotle. Next here, right before we get to Rome, we have the Songs of the South, which is an ancient Chinese anthology of poems. Chu Yuan is the most fascinating character in there. He was involved in politics and then had a falling out and wrote this very famous lament. And yeah, if you are interested in Chinese poetry, I'd probably start there. If you're interested in the early stuff rather than the Shi Jing. The Shi Jing is fascinating, but I think takes a little bit more of an imagination to get into, historical imagination, so to say, to be able to imagine the culture of the time. Then we have my earliest stuff related to Rome. That is T.J. Cornell, which ranges from, the earliest evidence we have of a somewhat Roman culture from the Bronze Age all the way up to the Punic Wars. This H.H. Scullard work spans pretty much the same time frame. A history of the Roman world goes from 753 AD, which is the canonical date when the Roman kingdom was founded before it became a republic. Then we get to The History of Rome by Theodore Mommsen, the very famous 5-volume work. This covers the entirety of the Roman Republic before it becomes an empire. I also have these 3-volume Lobes, my first Lobes that I have on here. Remains of Old Latin. So these mainly come from the 200s BC. The 12 tables are before that, but most of this stuff in here comes from, around 200 BC or so. Between 300 and 200 BC. Some are mixed in there. And so that's somewhat contemporary with like Songs of the South and, around the same time as Aristotle and that sort of thing. But I thought it more fitting to put with Mommsen. All right, next we get to some famous names here. Polybius, who wrote about the Punic Wars. The Dhammapada, which is a famous work from the Buddhist tradition, which is my first Buddhist text I have on here. Then we speed up a little bit, and I'm not sure the Dhammapada, I just kind of put that there. It wasn't clear to me when the texts were written, because it seems that it was kind of an amalgamation of sorts rather than, Plato wrote it here and he was alive at this time. So I just kind of put it in the general time frame that Buddhism was growing in India. Then, as I mentioned, we speed up a little bit. We have Cicero and Sallust, and brings us to another edition of that Rutledge History of the Ancient World, the Roman world, 44 BC to 180. And that's a fascinating book, as you see. I've read a bit from the beginning. Ronald Sim, The Roman Revolution, that covers the period of Julius Caesar and the creation of the Roman Empire. I have a biography of Augustus, Lucretius, and then all the other major Roman poets, Catullus, Horace, and a bunch of stuff on Virgil. This isn't all my stuff. What I decided to do with these shelves is, apart from biographies, I didn't allow myself to put any literary studies up here, because generally with literary studies, I don't refer to them very often. So I put them away in a box in the closet, and that's kind of my archive. So apart from biographies, which you've already seen some, you won't see any literary studies. The only way I went around that is annotations to specific works. So you won't see it today, but like, annotations to Ulysses. That's right next to Ulysses, that sort of thing. But no other literary studies. So I have a biography of Virgil by Tenny Frank. A lot of times I see his name messed up backwards, Frank Tenny, but it's Tenny Frank. Early 20th century, Virgil's works in the original Latin, and then my favorite translations of Virgil. And we have Ovid. I decided to put the Arthur Golding translation here. I normally would put a translation in its time that it was translated for, important translations like this, but that's the only edition of the Metamorphoses that I have because I dislike the other one so much. So rather than have a big hole where the Metamorphoses should be, I decided to put Arthur Golding's translation right there. And already we've passed the lifetime of Jesus, which is when our calendar is based on. So we've passed into the AD realm, and that gets us to Petronius and Seneca, these satires right next to Juvenal, Tacitus, and Trajan, who lived at the same time. And then a book maybe you might not be familiar with, the Arthashastra, which is a work on state making and kingsmanship from the 2nd century AD in India. And I just found it the other day. I probably read about it, but it didn't stick out in my mind. But when I see a nice thick penguin like this that I don't remember hearing about, I get very interested. And I just found that the other day at a local used bookstore and picked it up. So don't know much about it, but it's fascinating. Just from skimming it, has some good advice. The complete works of Epictetus, the famous Stoic philosopher, and fighting against my contrarian bent, I've also recently picked up Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. So you'll see that in a bit, but that would be right next to it if the gap wasn't so small. All right, continuing on, we have some green lobes now. I think we've only had red lobes. Yep, that's correct. So we have Suetonius, which my buddy also sent me, and then Lucian, or I don't know how you're supposed to say it, and then one of my favorite of these classics, Diogenes Laertius, some awesome biographies of philosophers. And I love to bring up some of those biographies to my students because it really brings these people to life. We get some more classical Chinese stuff. So the classic of Mountains and Seas is basically a collection of mythological stories from the time of the Han Dynasty. So the Han Dynasty is 200 BC to 200 AD, basically the same span as the height of the Roman Republic into empire. And I don't think that's a coincidence that they both reached their golden age at the same time. But Classic of Mountains and Seas has all sorts of famous figures in Chinese, even contemporary Chinese, what would you say, imagination, famous beasts, and all that kind of thing. The literary mind and the carving of dragons is one of the earliest, if not the earliest, work of literary criticism in Chinese culture, published by the Chinese University of Hong Kong and NYRB. They have this amazing calligram series, which I would recommend if you see calligrams right there. Anyone you see, just pick it up. They're awesome. You'll see more pretty soon. Then next here, you have two of the most important early Chinese poets, Xie Lingyun and Tao Qian, who also goes by Tao Yuanming. So these two poets are actually the same. Red Pine is the translator, but they didn't put the author's name on there. Interesting choice. But I got this one because it's bilingual. This one is my favorite translation, though. David Hinton is one of these people I always look for. Burton Watson, who you saw with the Tso Chuan, that translation of Chinese history, and then David Hinton, who also did that 4 Chinese classics I have up top. Excuse me. All right. Then we have Tales of Dionysus, the last epic of the classical age. Comes about, what was it, 4th century AD, I believe, just before Boethius. And the interesting thing about this translation is that it was translated by a ton of different people. Then we get to Boethius, the Consolation of Philosophy, I think he's considered kind of the end of the classical age and into the early medieval, in the 400s AD into 500s. The rise and fall of the Imperial Guptas. So the Imperial Gupta dynasty was really a golden age of India, where you start to get the finalized versions of the famous epics like the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. And in addition to that, you also get authors, court poets, taking inspiration from these epics and expanding on them through either plays or court epics. And so Kalidasa is the most famous poet of this time. The recognition of Shakuntala is more in the setup of a play, but he also has court epics as well. And I love putting these things together. Like Boethius is alive at basically the same time as Kalidasa, and then Procopius comes a little bit later, the Byzantine author. And around the same time is Gregory of Tours with his History of the Franks. And at the same time is this book called Desert Tracings, which is 6 classic Arabian odes. So these are all pre-Islamic Arabian poems. Then, following Kalidasa, you have Bharavi and Magha. They both wrote these court epics, both implicitly trying to outdo their predecessor. So Kalidasa comes first, Bharavi comes next, and Kalidasa was very skilled with wordplay, such as puns and palindromes and that sort of thing. And so Bharavi stepped it up one layer. And what I really like about these Murti Classical Library, also published by Harvard, kind of like branching off from their Loeb editions, is that it shows the original Sanskrit. And so you get to see where Bharavi uses, let's say the same syllable, but you can read it different ways in a palindromic form, and it means different things depending on how you read it. And then Magha came the last, and he tried to one-up Bharavi. And right at the same time, you have the Quran written down, and this is a bilingual edition with the parallel Arabic text, which is very cool. Right after that, in the late 600s to 700s, you get the Tang Dynasty in China, which is, in my opinion, the golden age of Chinese culture. You get all the greatest poets in Chinese culture, and really some of the best literature the world has ever seen. I've just been blown away with what I've been reading of this poetry in the last year or two. I had read some of this poetry for a while, really. I had read Du Fu and Li Po, Li Bai for years. I don't know, maybe 6-7 years, but I didn't really get it. And my students gave a presentation on the Sino-Tibetan language family, and then showed some of it, and it just opened up a whole new world for me. So Stephen Owen, as you see that 3-volume work, he is the expert on the Tang Dynasty. Published the first 2 yellow ones in the 80s. Those are reprints, and then this 3rd one finally came out. And he's a very nice guy. I sent him a quick email, and he responded very kindly to me. I had a question about Han Dynasty poetry, really post-Han Dynasty poetry. But then we get the earliest Tang Dynasty poets. That's Meng Haojian And then Wang Wei, very, very famous Chinese poet there. And again, you see a lot of David Hinton. He's my favorite translator. Li Po, or Li Bai, modern day in China, you'll hear his name as Li Bai. And then Du Fu. Now, I only have a little bit of Du Fu here. I have some other stuff elsewhere, but David Hinton has a very good expanded edition of selected Du Fu. We read that in my literature class this year. Three Zen Sutras, also translated by Red Pine. So Zen is a combination of Buddhism and Taoism. And so Zen was really being formed at the same time that all of this Chinese poetry was coming about. There we have the Kojiki. That is the earliest work in Japanese historiography. So it's like kind of pseudo-mythological, kind of like the Iliad or the Odyssey. Here we have a couple biographies of Du Fu. David Hinton's is more of a literary analysis plus biography. And then Elliot Weinberger is a work of literature in itself. It's kind of like an aphoristic biography, including some, extracts from Du Fu's poetry. It's very, very cool. We have A.C. Graham, another famous sinologist, and he has this edition from MYRB, Poems of the Late Tang. I really like his translations, and he includes some translations of poets that don't have an easy edition of an individual work to come by, so highly recommended there. The University of Washington had I believe it was a 50% off sale, which is the only reason I was able to get that big green book in the middle, a thorough exploration in historiography. So that kind of fills in the Chinese gap that I had in my mind of historiography. Because in English, of course, you have someone like Arnold Toynbee. In Arabic, you have a work like the Muqaddimah by Ibn Khaldun. And I was thinking, well, there must be a Chinese, and of course there is. So this is a Tang Dynasty work of historiography. He examines all of the Chinese historians up to his point, criticizes them, explains what they did well, and then kind of samples his own time through his historiographic lens. And that gets us to late 700s into the early 800s. So unfortunately, after I got these shelves put up, I found a book here and a book there that didn't quite fit totally, because in the end I do have limited shelf space. So I had to stack some books on the top. So we see there's Bede, the Ecclesiastical History of the English People, the Taine, the great Irish early work, and then Carolingian Chronicles, which is two primary source works from the time of Charlemagne. I was really interested in that for the way that Charlemagne converted the heathens of his time. We have some other Chinese poets, Liu Zhongguan, who was exiled, and what I really like about that book is that it, as the title implies, the poetic garden of Liu Zhongguan. So he was exiled to the south of China. Now, the north of China was the area where all of the power had been held, north central, like Luoyang, Chang'an, and even now Beijing is in the north. So the south was kind of the marches, the farther reaches of the empire. Tang Dynasty, definitely. So he was exiled down there, and in some of his poems, he's the only person to ever reference a certain plant or a certain herb or this kind of thing. And during his time in exile, he had a lot of time to think about nature. And really reading this Chinese poetry and the use of nature has really opened my mind to a better way of seeing nature than the culture that surrounds me. So I'm really grateful for that. And that's also published by Deep Vellum, who is coming through with the classical Chinese translations. I'm glad to see it. In Such Hard Times, another Red Pine by Wei Ying Wu, excellent. We have Brocade River poems, selected works of Xue Tao, which is She was a Chinese Tang Dynasty courtesan. I think she's the most famous female poet from the Tang Dynasty. I'm pretty sure. I do also have an anthology translated by Joanne Larson, or Jean Larson, what is it? Jeanne, probably Larson. Okay. She also has an anthology, but I also told myself I'm going to try to stay away from anthologies. There are some books, though, like the next book I'm going to highlight, The Poetry of the Carolingian Renaissance. Those poets are so hard to come by, I have to include anthologies, kind of like Poems of the Late Tang. But I chose Shui Tao to be a representative poet there. Li Shangyin, Li He, and this is also one of those calligrams. Collected songs of Cold Mountain. And then we get back to the European subcontinent. The Poetic Edda, which was probably originally solidified around the 800s, around the same time as large numbers of the poems in the Exeter book, and probably around the same time that Beowulf would have been composed, rather than the manuscript tradition we have goes around to the year 1000. But the dates are, of course, hard to totally nail down. As you see, I have a bunch of Beowulf stuff. Kleber's Beowulf is the like prime academic edition with tons of notes and the actual Old English. That early English text society, that brown volume I have, is a facsimile of the manuscript, which is one of my prized possessions. I just love seeing the handwriting of the time, and it lets you inhabit the I guess mind space of the original composer. You see there sitting on the top, we have Beowulf, As I Crossed a Bridge of Dreams, which is a diary from Heian, Japan, so the time of the Tale of Genji, 1000 AD roughly. And then Li Qingchao, we've scooted ahead a little bit to around the year 1000. She is the greatest female Chinese poet in all of Chinese culture, and also just an excellent poet. And that edition, published by New Directions, is by Kenneth Rexroth and Ling Chung, I think from maybe the 60s. But I was very, very pleased to find that. I got that on my recent trip to Vancouver, and it was a perfect addition to my library here. Old English Boethius, Old English shorter poems, wisdom and lyrics. So all of these, I think all of these come from the Exeter book. Maybe a couple come from the other major early English books. I do want to finish this series, this Krapp's, what is it? Old English Corpus. That's not the name of it, but that's basically what it is. It's all of the Old English literature, the poetry that we have. Then we have a masterwork of history on Imperial China from 900 to 1800. So that covers the very end of the Tang Dynasty, and then the Song Dynasty, through the Mongolian conquest, the Yuan Dynasty. You get the Ming Dynasty, and then it ends in like the middle of the Qing Dynasty. And Frederick Mote was a major Chinese scholar of the 20th century. We have an introduction to Sung poetry by Yoshikawa. We have a couple works here. This one is really faded. Ouyang Xu and Su Tongpo, also known as Su Shi. He is the famous poet of the Sung Dynasty, one of the greatest poets in Chinese culture. Just amazing, amazing stuff. And that's Burton Watson, as you see. Late poems of Wang Anshi. So they were both highly involved in politics, Su Tongpo and Wang Anshi, and they were also some of the best writers at the time, something we could wish for here in the United States. Tales of Issa, one of the oldest works of Japanese, not short stories, but maybe kind of mythological short stories, you could think of it. The Tale of Genji, unabridged. Have not read it yet, but I'm excited to. Then we get to the Islamic Golden Age, a book on the Abbasid Caliphate and poems of Al-Mutanabi, the greatest poet in the Arabic language. Very slim edition, the only one published in English. Can't believe it. But it's bilingual, so it's pretty cool to look at. All right, and then my last shelf, this is all I'll be able to get to because I can feel my voice. Hopefully it's not too annoying. I can feel it kind of becoming raspy. So, as you see there, we have one of the great Hebrew poets of the Middle Ages around the year 1000, Solomon ibn Gabriel, Vulture in a Cage, published by Archipelago, Song of Roland, A New History of the New Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire. And of course, I tried to put that next to Michael Psellos, 14 Byzantine Rulers. We have another work from the NYU Arabic Library, the Epistle of Forgiveness. This very kind of cynical pre-Dante figure that explores the afterlife. The Lord of the Panther Skin, which is the height of the Georgian Renaissance in Atlanta. No, I'm just kidding, of course. But yeah, heavily influenced by Persian culture, which I'm fascinated with. The Shahnameh is on its way. I don't have it yet, but I will have it momentarily from my buddy Cyrus. Doing a bit of a book swap. Then the Alexiado's up there to fill out the Byzantine culture. And then we have Roman de Brut, Layamon's Brut, and the History of the Kings of Britain, right next to a biography of Emperor Huizong, the kind of philosopher emperor of China around the end of the Tang Dynasty. Then we have Al-Hariri, the Makamat of Al-Hariri, translated as Impostures. That's also the NYU library, and I decided to get the original Arabic because why not have the best non-Quran prose work in the entire Arabic language in the original? I couldn't think of a good reason. And I got it for half off on that NYU sale, so even better. Burton Watson, one of the older Sung Dynasty poets, the old man who does as he pleases. Excuse me. And then we get to troubadours. These are all figures that, of course, feature in Dante's Divine Comedy, the poems of Bertrand de Born, one of Ezra Pound's favorites, Lark in the Morning, which is an anthology, Proenza is my favorite anthology of troubadour poetry, Richard Zenith in Cantigas, I'm not sure how to say that, is an anthology of Galician Portuguese troubadour poems. And Richard Zenith, of course, is the famous translator of Fernando Pessoa. Rumi's The Masnavi, Book 1. Where are the other books, Oxford? I'm waiting. Chrétien de Troyes, the Arthurian romances, after Geoffrey of Monmouth got everybody riled up. Chrétien de Troyes got everyone even more riled up. Then we have some Minnesang, German Minnesang poets. Walter von der Vogelweide, one of the most fun names to say. The lyrics, then we have Hartmann von Aue, Wolfram von Eschenbach, and Gottfried von Strasbourg. And then last but not least, Songs from a Single Eye by Oswald von Wolkenstein. All right, there we go. Then a couple cool things before I leave you guys. I have some of my historiography stuff here. Kroeber, Sorokin, new book, Perito, Collapse of Complex Societies, and Helen Waddell's Medieval Latin Lyrics. And Do Not Be Afraid, Stoics. I have Marcus Aurelius and Pierre Hadot, The Inner Citadel. All right, so that's my shelf. That gets us to about the year 1200, give or take. Not exact, but that gets us to about the year 1200, which I personally am a little bit embarrassed that I can fit 4,000 years of literature into only one bookshelf, but I'm doing better. It was a lot worse not too long ago, so we'll see. Anyway, here is my next shelf I will be showing off. You can get a sneak peek, and that will have to come at a later date. Hopefully my voice wasn't too annoying, and always remember, looking at these old books, death is a gang boss.